Welcome back to Maui Causes. I'm Sam Small. Maui County made history this past year by being the first time ever to have a citizens' initiative collect enough signatures on a ballot to actually get a new proposed law on the election ballot for the people to vote on, circumventing the county council, and that is the first time that's ever happened. Political history. Similarly, on the national scale, there is an opportunity for the first time ever, really, to have the citizens or the states petition the federal government to have a constitutional convention, an opportunity to add amendments to our Constitution. Dan Marks is a Hawaii resident. He's here with us today. And Dan has played an integral role in making this happen. Dan, thank you for being here. And thank you for what you've been doing and the opportunity to make history.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Sam. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. An honor to speak to everybody over there on Maui. And we were watching on election night, watching that election results come in, and we were extremely sad to see a lot of those polling numbers from the first readings. And we were ecstatic when we saw that the people in Maui County had stood up against the big money forces of Monsanto and large corporations and really stood up for themselves. So we were extremely happy about that, and it really showed a lot of people, I think, across the country that people power ultimately can be stronger than the money power out there. So it was a lesson for everybody.
Well, it was, and you know, the example here of Monsanto and Dow spending corporate money, over $8 million on the record, you know, to affect the vote here. How much money off the record, we'll never know. I would love to do a photo survey of public officials and their new cars to just
right.
be a measure of who benefited from all of that political operation. And I think the people of Maui County responded appropriately to the inappropriateness of that much money being spent in a political election by a corporation. And certainly I think that on the national level, Citizens United and Metuchen, those court rulings have really screwed up our political system to the max. The Koch brothers are spending billions of dollars in the next election cycle, and it is a true risk to our democracy.
Exactly.
We have to initiate change, and a constitutional convention is a great way to do it. What did you do, and what has changed or changing because of what you've done?
Well, let's back up to what I did was it relates to Article 5 of the Constitution. Article 5 of the Constitution is the part of the Constitution that describes how we amend the Constitution, and it gives us two ways to propose amendments. We can either let Congress propose an amendment in 2/3 of both houses, would have to support it, and then it goes out to the states, and then 75% of the states, or 38 states, would have to ratify it. Now, the founders knew that one day Congress would probably be the problem, and in that event, we would need some other way to circumvent Congress, so they gave us the convention. And once 2/3, or 34 right now, of the states apply for this convention, it's a peremptory duty of Congress to call it. And just like Congress, it has actually equal powers of Congress. They would propose amendments to the Constitution, the delegates would. They would deliberate them, figure out what the best language is. If it passes by 2/3 majority in that convention, just like it came from Congress, it would go out to the states, And if 75% of the states decided that it was a good amendment, it becomes part of the Constitution. Now, what we did as a group is we had looked at the record of applications that was independently researched by Friends of Article 5 Convention, and we looked at all this data. They had scanned the book and page right out of the congressional record of all of these applications that were sent in from state legislatures.
And that's over the entire history of the Union.
Right. And we had noticed, too, that there were a few instances where the number of applications had exceeded the 2/3 requirement, even if it was required to be a single subject application, which we cannot find any legal reference, no law, no case that it requires that. The Constitution actually reads that on the application of 2/3 of the legislatures. It does not say on the identical application of 2/3 of the legislatures.
Right. So as long as 2/3 of the states have made a generic request for a constitutional convention, it has to happen.
It doesn't seem that it even has to be a generic request. So let me back up again.
Sure.
What we did is we went to Congress and we asked them to count the applications on record. What they did is they received them over the last 200 years and they would put them in the congressional record, but they never assigned the duty to keep track of these things to any entity. The archivist in Congress, for example, will track, if Congress sends out an amendment, and they've done it many, many times, they will track and see how many states have ratified that amendment, so we'll know exactly where we are in the stage of the process for each amendment. However, for these applications, there was never an official number that was released.
They weren't keeping track. Nobody was keeping track of them.
Right. So we were frustrated by that, and we went to Congress. We hassled with them for quite a while, and then we got fed up, and I personally called up the Parliamentarian of the House of Representatives, Tom Wickham.
And you were just able to get this guy on the phone?
Yeah. Actually, it's amazing how shields are down in D.C. There's no buffer there. If you want to call up these people, you can do it, and especially the bureaucrats or legislative directors, and these are the key people in the staff, the directors. Some are legislative aides, but if you get a hold of the legislative director, you're pretty much talking to that senator or congressman. So it's not impossible for us to talk to these people, and especially the staff of all these different departments and stuff like that.
Right, because the staff are employees. They don't have a political agenda one way or another. They just want to do what's right.
And Tom Wickham, the parliamentarian, he described, it was another person who actually described him as the traffic cop in Congress, who basically directs traffic in case there's any question about procedure. Right. The parliamentarian has the power to step in and say, whoa, you're doing it wrong, basically. And so I contacted him, told him that there was a dilemma. We don't know how many states have applied, which states have applied, which states haven't, and we need clarity on this issue if we're ever going to use Article 5 of the Constitution. And he thought that was a completely reasonable request. So he instructed me to write up a letter. He basically dictated it to me and created a process for us to formally request this official count that didn't exist before. Right. So I took the letter to the clerk of House, back to where we'd been really butting our heads against the wall with them, and I handed them I sent it in and made them sign for it. And the request included 42 states with standing legal applications that I asked them to tally and verify. Now, again, it takes 34 states. 42 states is more than 34. So
And that's 42.
Was even close.
That's 42 out of what, like 700 different applications that have been made since the United States was formed.
Right. The total number of applications from all the states over the years is well over 700. It was very confusing because Article 5 calls for 2/3 of the states. What I did is I sought to go through that list and find the most persuasive application for each state, and then I noted that as, this looks like a standing legal application. I need you guys to verify this. And if they could verify that list, it was obvious we needed to get a convention call from Congress.
And there's no
just this year,
there's no time limit on these applications. That it doesn't go stale unless that's built into the application. If they haven't ratified this or taken action on it, well, then it just sunset clause.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just on the
had
books
that
in
sunset
perpetuity.
clause in it, but by and large, most of these did not. They were meant to accumulate there, and unless it's specifically stated that it will expire in a certain period of time, nothing will expire these applications until Congress calls a convention. Then everything goes back to zero again. But until then, they as they say, lay on the table, waiting for Congress to take action on them.
Right, and they've never called a constitutional convention this way. There are amendments to the Constitution, so they had to have had. Was that through a constitutional convention, or that was generated by Congress itself?
It was all of our amendments have been generated through Congress. The original Constitution, of course, was in the Constitutional Convention in 1778, and since then, we've never had this method used before.
Right.
And the main reason they haven't used it is that they had never acknowledged these applications from states. And we knew if we could get them to acknowledge one of them, they would have to acknowledge all 700 of them.
Right.
And that's what they're doing right now. On January 5th of this year, last month even, the Judiciary Committee finally passed a rule to assign the duty to the chair of the Judiciary Committee to kind of go through these applications, identify them as applications, and then pass them to the Clerk of House, who we approached first, and have them post them up on a website for transparency so everybody can see what these are. There was never even a collection, an official collection of these records before. They're literally going through old dusty boxes in the Capitol in Washington, D.C. that are 200 years old, and digging these things out, the original applications from state legislatures, not going through the congressional record, but the hard copy that was sent to them over the hundreds of years that we've been in existence. So it's very historic. I mean, by definition, it's historical. But
it is. It's fantastic, and it's really another parallel to Hawaii, in that the framers of the Constitution of the United States foresaw the potentiality of Congress being the problem, just as you say, and they created a mechanism for solving that. Here in the state of Hawaii, the elders of the Hawaiian tradition, during the process of negotiating to, this being taken over by the United States and coming up with a state constitution for the state of Hawaii, they insisted to write into the state constitution for Hawaii clauses that protected the public resources. They sought to protect the physicality of the land, the aina, the water, the public these natural resources. They wrote a responsibility of the public to care and take care, malama the aina, And they wrote that into the state constitution, and it's unique in the Union. And that was the linchpin of the Shaka movement. That was the linchpin of the GMO moratorium, because just as you simply stepped forward and said, hey, this stuff exists, tally it. Let's make a record of it. Nobody asked that before. Well, the same thing here in Hawaii. No one before has stood up for the INA and said, hey, this needs to be protected, and there's a mechanism for doing it. We're going to do it.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but I definitely feel like there is a synchronicity going on globally. And it's not just us. It's amazing that we are potentially triggering this opportunity, and it sure looks like it. The clerk website is posting these up right now, and they've only got 10 states up out of 700 applications, but they've only listed 10 states so far. But they're going backwards, and they've only reached this year and last year. They haven't even reached back to 2013 yet. We estimated it's going to be, by the time they hit 1990 going backwards, it's going to be obvious that a convention needs to be called. But it's amazing that we see the United Kingdom writing their first constitution right now after hundreds of years. They've been basically running on the Magna Carta and case law for centuries. Right. And Iceland just did a constitutional convention where they crowdsourced their constitution. Same goal, I guess, in the United Kingdom. Ireland just had a constitutional convention. Somalia just had a constitutional convention. Tunisia. It's more than a coincidence to me. It seems to be a human condition that we're seeing people realize and acknowledge their own authority in their government and in their society, and taking advantage of it.
The Iceland example is the sweetest, because what's different now than historically? The internet. It's access to information, and the Iceland model, where they literally opened the process up to an open source, a crowdsourcing model to allow the people, whatever brainiac is out there that can contribute some piece of gold to the process, was able to do that. And they were able to use the internet and use the web and use that communication accessibility to craft the best possible document, get as much input as possible. And when you do that, man, people really light up, because it's an opportunity for individuals to be empowered, and given that power, people will use it.
Right. I think when we look at what they did in Iceland, they probably one of the more amazing things is that here in America, we're getting them to count up these state applications. There's a process for this. There really wasn't a process for them to do this in Iceland. They didn't ask for permission. They took the initiative themselves and assembled themselves. And then they started discussing these things as a nation. And I think you're kind of making the point, too, that all of us working on something like this is smarter than any one of us. Yeah. And that's really the concept behind this, is that the smartest person in the room still doesn't get it sometimes. And we see that with Congress too. When they start talking about how to reverse Citizens United, they proposed an amendment in the Senate last year, and it handed over the control of political speech to state legislatures and Congress. Well, that's not exactly what we were hoping for. That gives Congress and state legislatures, I mean, God forbid, we would let the state of Kansas, or what Wisconsin is going through right now, start deciding what is acceptable political speech and what kind of criteria they would put on that. Would they say that, I mean, in Kansas, for example, they have done all kinds of real creative legislation that would make it nearly impossible for an abortion clinic to survive there. They put so many different criterias on, it has to be this much space. And are they going to do that to their political speech too? I would assume so. Mm-hmm. So to me, the proposal from Congress was completely disingenuous. It was just a handover of power. It didn't really change corporate personhood, didn't redefine money as anything other than speech. But it was, it was really offensive. If somebody is really concerned about Citizens United, it didn't do anything. It gave them the power to navigate the First Amendment for us, but it also gave them the power to make it much worse too. And it's obvious to me Congress doesn't get it. They don't get it. It's pretty obvious to me on the GMO issue that the president doesn't get it. If he's appointing Monsanto to be head of the any agency, really, but
FDA.
It's pretty obvious to me that the folks in D.C. don't understand where we're coming from,
right?
And these people that call themselves progressive are not. They seem to defend the rights of corporations and call that neoliberal or liberal, when it's much more conservative than your average person in America who's starting to understand that our representation is going down the tubes.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it is our duty. It's our right, and it is our duty, as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, to throw off those governments and to alter and abolish the government that is oppressing us.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what this is for.
Yeah. Well, and that's Eisenhower warned us all about the military-industrial complex taking over our nation, and really that's what's happened. He saw it coming, and he on his exit he made that warning, and people really didn't heed it, and we're seeing the result of it now, where corporations and corporate influence and money from the corporations is just overwhelming our system. And both sides are, the Republicans and the Democrats, they're both just sucking that money up and playing heed to those corporate interests, and it's just short-term profits. The banking industry is at the heart of it, and perhaps even in a constitutional convention, there might be an opportunity to address the Federal Reserve. And how our banking system here in the United States is so dysfunctional, and so essentially it corrupt.
Absolutely, I think really what this is about. If you want to talk about extreme agendas, they're not going to happen in this kind of a setting. It takes so much agreement to pass just through the convention, and then it takes more agreement to get ratified in the state. So the further you get away from the middle, the less of a chance you have of passing anything. But things like the Federal Reserve, you do see Dennis Kucinich and Harry Reid, as well as Ron and Rand Paul, talk about the Federal Reserve. And it seems to be a concern across the board. And if the issue comes up, what are we doing here? How does this work? I think under scrutiny, people will find that it doesn't work for them,
right,
and there's probably a better way to do it. So,
well, calling for an accounting, it's the same kind of thing. That nobody tallied the applications for constitutional convention, and nobody's really paying attention to the assets of the nation. There is no real accounting for the Federal Reserve.
I would, it sounds very tinfoil hat to try to discuss this kind of stuff, but when we looked at all of these records and we started going through what is in the congressional record, we would come across these applications from states every once in a while. I wasn't the first person to count. 100 years ago, in 1907, the state of Wyoming went through the records and counted up and listed in their application 35 states that had applied for the direct election of senators, which later became the 17th Amendment. At the time, I believe it was 32 states that were required to trigger the convention because there were fewer states. But they had 35. The Constitution requires, this is one of those instances where we had discovered that Congress should have called it then, but they didn't. They didn't pass that amendment until 1913. There was 6 years there where it should have been pretty obvious that they needed to call this convention, but they didn't. And it would have been one thing if one house of Congress had forgot to count these things over 200 years. Right. But we're talking about two houses of Congress that neglected to do this. And for me, it's hard to swallow that this was by accident. In fact, I know of 22 different times that they tried to assign the duty to count in the 1970s, but that bill never passed. So they have acknowledged that there's a problem there, but they just didn't have the will to deal with it.
Yeah. Well,
unfortunately, this isn't a matter of will.
Right.
This is their duty to acknowledge state applications for this thing. So there was something very fishy going on there, and it's been going on for over 100 years. And you mentioned, military-industrial complex. World War I started in 1914, the year after they passed this stuff. So, I mean, I kind of look back at this is where things really could have been straightened out, but instead something weird happened, and a whole bunch of other strange things started happening right after that. We had the creation of the IRS, federal income tax, the creation of the Federal Reserve, and they were creating entities that were almost outside the reach of this convention too at the same time. So it's a really bizarre situation that I think once we start looking into this record and figuring out when they probably should have called this for the first time, we're going to find that whoever put their thumb on the scale has, I mean, looking back, it's pretty easy to see that they changed our history.
Yeah.
That we could have had the right to vote for blacks and women decades before we did.
Right.
Who knows what other amendments could have been passed sooner, or that we've just kind of missed an opportunity out on because there was enough energy around those ideas at the time. And sometimes people's focus moves on to another issue, and that's a shame because we could have dealt with some of the things like electoral college was one of them. There was a lot of applications to abolish the electoral college. What if that was already gone by the time the 2000 recount election came around, the Gore v. Bush? And I mean, we wouldn't have had that whole mess at the Supreme Court trying to decide how to decide the election. It should have been the most votes, you win. But it didn't work out like that.
So this process that the clerks are engaged in to come up with the magic number to trigger the convention, if a convention is called, what happens? Their delegates get elected?
Well, the first thing that Congress will do, they have the choice. They don't have a whole lot of power. They don't get to debate if they should call a convention. It's already, it's a number. Once the states have reached that number, it's a done deal. The Congress gets the opportunity to choose the time and the place in the call. And the call is an enabling act. And if you look at all of the enabling acts over 200 years, they have issued these things for statehood conventions and the Reconstruction conventions after the Civil War. On all of these enabling acts since the beginning of this Constitution, all of them have required an election of delegates to these conventions. And these were, because the states didn't exist yet, they were definitely federal amendatory conventions. Since we've never had an Article 5 convention, they're probably the closest thing to it. So we don't really know for sure exactly what they're going to do. They don't know for sure what they're going to do. But, you know, the state of Hawaii has a process for electing delegates to the state convention, and it is elected delegates. And if it's ambiguous at the time that the call comes through, if it's not specified in that call that they need to elect delegates by popular representation, then it's pretty clear that the state of Hawaii will probably opt to go with the same process or as similar as they can get to what's already established. Otherwise, we've got a situation where it looks like they might be trying to pull something, and they're not going to want to do that. People get real testy when you start talking about changing the Constitution. So apathy is going to be real short supply when you're talking about making these kinds of changes.
So ostensibly, there would be it would be part of the next general election would be measures to elect individuals to be in the convention.
I think we might be looking at a special election. Honestly, excuse me. One of the congressional research reports, I believe in the 1980s, took a look at the time difference when they could expect a convention to assemble as soon as the call has come from Congress. And they determined that there's no reason that it wouldn't be able to take place within a year from the call to the first gavel. Mm-hmm. So I think we're talking about a pretty fast process as far as assembling these people, and I don't think we're going to have 2 years to examine these candidates like we would for president or anything else. I think what we're really talking about is an election where these people say, I support this amendment or these two amendments, and they're very specific. They're in writing. So the folks out there that are voting are, yes, they're voting for a person, but the reason they're voting for that person is because they support a specific text, and it's more that they're voting for that text than the person. So right. as people kind of say, okay, these are the amendments I like, it kind of defines who they are, you're going to see it's a different kind of election. It's just going to be much more concrete. We're not going to be talking about I stand for freedom and liberty. There's not going to be those obtuse things. We need to have people that have specific proposals that they support, and otherwise they're not going to be too helpful. If somebody's trying to get elected by your typical rhetoric, then that's I don't think it's going to work. I think the other factor is because the Constitutional Convention would be a very short-term, one-time affair with a dedicated process to create possible amendments, any number of possible amendments to the Constitution that would then be offered up to ratification. It may not be short at all. It could last. The first convention lasted 2 years in the 1700s. So this could last 2 or 3 years. There are some that say that it will never end. It will just adjourn, and when it feels like it has a need to discuss things, maybe it will be on a yearly basis. They have a quick meeting that discusses proposals, and if there's no proposals, they'll go home. But I've heard some theories that it would operate like Texas legislature or Wisconsin legislature did, where you see the Democrats, they left to try to break quorum, and if the assembly tried to break quorum, the assembly has a right to go grab those delegates and bring them back to the assembly to create quorum, just like The state of Texas and Wisconsin sent out sheriffs to go get those legislators back into the assembly.
Right.
So, there could be some political gamesmanship going on, but again, the threshold, we're not talking about a 51% majority. When you've got a legislature out there that has that you're winning things by slim majorities of a majority of 51%. It's okay for you to pursue these wedge issues because you have potential to, get that edge all the time.
To win.
This is not, when it requires 2/3 majority, you're not going to be able to game the system like your typical assembly. It's going to require, basically, if we try to get rid of gun rights, I mean, you would see conservatives across the country rally to beat it. We would have zero chance of passing that, so it's a non-starter for us. There's a number of issues on the right that if they start bringing it up, so like banning abortions, it's not going very far. It's just too controversial. It's just not going to happen. So we really need to come together as Americans, identify the problems we need to deal with, and work on those solutions and figure out what works best for all of us. They've got a balanced budget amendment they've proposed. We don't like it, but we haven't really offered up anything to compete with it either. We need a balanced budget proposal from the left that kind of deals with it, because what they're identifying is a valid problem, and they're trying to deal with it. It's just, it really needs the deliberation and participation of the left to try to arrive at a solution that makes sense, because what they've got on the table is just garbage, and nobody wants it.
Well, so
issues, they do identify a real problem.
Issues for that poll so heavily in one direction, but yet Congress is actively going in the opposite direction. I mean, would that be like GMO labeling? Where the polls show that most of the public wants labeling of their food, but yet the government and the politicians are taking no action. Is that an issue that could survive a constitutional convention?
Absolutely. In fact, I think that it is kind of. I don't mean any offense by this, but I think it's kind of weak in the knees to go for labeling. What we've seen in other countries do is they have banned GMO farming in their countries.
Completely.
And it definitely takes a lot out of your ecology. It's a risk to your environment to have these things cultivated in their countries, and they took a stand and just said no more.
Right.
And
but that doesn't poll.
We have a chance to do that instead of just labeling.
Right, but removing GM crops from our nation is not polling very high.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. What was that?
Yeah, banning GMOs isn't polling the same way as labeling is polling. I mean, people are behind the labeling issue, and maybe the discussion will grow, but there's not a tremendous yet movement to ban GMOs. That's why here in Maui County we went for a temporary moratorium, because we polled the community here and said, would you support an outright ban, or would you support a temporary measure until it was proven safe, or at least not harmful? Nothing can be proven 100% safe. Nothing is 100% safe. And the response, came back overwhelmingly that people supported a temporary moratorium. We didn't have the support for an outright ban. On the GMO issue, on the GMO issue, it just seems that, you know, labeling has a chance, and a national ban on GMOs, you know, might be a pretty hard sell.
Well, I agree. That's what the numbers read. But at the same time, I'd have to say that we really haven't had a discussion about banning that kind of thing. We've talked about, as on a national level in many, many states, we talked about labeling issues. And I think we do that because it is politically feasible that we could potentially pass something like that in the state legislature. This is, again, a different environment. It has the opportunity for people to talk about these things openly, and we get beyond what's politically feasible to restructuring an entire system potentially. So incremental steps like that would work really good, I think, with the legislature and stuff like that. But I think when we have that conversation of, do we even want to have these GMOs grown in our country, I think the polling numbers that you see really reflect that people are against GMOs. Whether they're specifically against a policy of labeling or not, you know, again, I think if we have that conversation, just like people were against the war in Syria, we see them a year later, after the media starts talking about how bad it is over there, we see people's opinions shift dramatically on that. And it's just a matter of what kind of conversation are we willing to have, really. And when we start having those conversations, there's some reasonable conclusions we can make.
What other topics do you think are ripe for a constitutional amendment?
I believe that, for one thing, recall of senators. We don't have recall of congressmen either. If they've done something even illegal, we can't get rid of them. Congress can expel them with a vote, but we don't have anything like that. I would like to see a national initiative process, which is another way of, it takes so much agreement in a convention that getting a national initiative process, you can go around from state to state, have people directly vote on an issue. It's almost like wishing for more wishes in a convention. I'd also like to see, I think we can come to some agreement about extending Fourth Amendment privacy rights to internet usage. We could talk about things like death with dignity, a right to death. We saw Robin Williams recently hang himself because there's no physician-assisted suicides. He did it when he was able to, which is unfortunate and sad. I had an uncle that was dying of multiple sclerosis, and he was in decline for well over a decade and barely able to function. So, yeah, if he could have taken that burden off of his family, I know he probably would have done that. So there's a number of issues that we can talk about just as human beings. And again, kind of getting back to these parties and the wedge issues, since they operate by wedge issues, we don't see a lot of amendment proposals coming out of the parties. And I think we need to identify that the parties, the two major parties at least, are a huge part of the problem that we are having right now in America. And we need to make it taboo to let these party people take place or participate in this convention, because we can't pass a law or anything like that forbidding it, but we as Americans need to make sure that we don't get slick politicians in this kind of assembly. We need to get regular folks in there, teachers, professors, clergy, activists, people with a burning desire to fix problems and who are tired of the bullshit in America. And frankly, that's what we need to do right now.
Well, and of course on the list is, reversing Citizens United and Metuchen and getting corporate money, this corporate personhood, to get that money is not free speech, and remove that funding from politics. Unfortunately, that financial influence would be a part of any election process to elect the delegates. So it's a real wild card as to how much the Koch brothers would dump into all of those local elections, all those state elections, I guess, interim, special elections all across the nation. I can only imagine that they would spend a small fortune to try and control the Constitutional Convention. If their people, their puppets got in, we could end up even with amendments that went in the wrong direction.
Well, if they tried, the power of groups like the Koch brothers and whatnot is, in this kind of a setting, is to take good ideas and obstruct them, just like we saw Phyllis Schlafly do with the Equal Rights Amendment. She spewed lies and fear. One of the major fear points that she was stroking was that if we pass the Equal Rights Amendment, they're going to start drafting women to Vietnam. And, that was a real turnoff. So they fell short, one state. So, but they're not going to propose ideas that are wildly popular. There's not going to be a way to enshrine the plutocracy that's going to have the support of 38 states in it. And again, I think that the best way to avoid the influence of the Koch brothers and other groups is, again, to make sure that we're not talking about party people. We want just normal people, common people in this thing, and it's very possible. The last con here in Hawaii for the state convention had about 107, I think, delegates to it. And I think the number of politicians in the assembly was less than 10. So if we can basically repeat history and just make sure that we've got some normal people in the room, we have a much better chance of success.
Normal people in the room. Wow.
It sounds hard, but honestly, it says that we should be electing these people by popular representation.
Yeah.
It doesn't say how we're electing these people. So, and states do control their election process. For example, here in Hawaii, in the presidential election, we have caucuses, and it's party caucus. But really, that might be the best way. That's what Iceland did. Is they got together and they started to assemble in caucuses, and then they started figuring out what agenda they wanted to talk about in a convention, and then they chose people from that caucus to go on to the next caucus, and then those people chose who went on to the next convention, and they ended up with 25 people. They knew what was being discussed. They were there in the room with them the whole time. They seemed to have a very, very good command of the issues, and they trusted them when they sent them there. So, we could easily set up a process where we have convention or caucuses that select and build our agenda for this meeting. Another thing we can do is have a lottery selection of willing participants that kind of narrow the field to here's 10 people that would be willing to go. You folks pick 3 of them, and again, they would be much more independent than somebody who's working in a party. If somebody from the parties slip through and end up in that group that you're choosing from, it'd be pretty easy for everybody to say, "No, let's stay away from those major party players." I can't stress that enough, how important it is that we get away from the parties in this process.
Well, and that's the two-party system has, basically paralyzed the political process across the nation. Voter turnout here in Hawaii, as the worst there is. Maui County, even, you know, the worst there is. And, you know, we have our own structural problems, you know, here in Maui County, where, for instance, the county council, our members are voted on by the entire county, not just the district that they are supposed to be representing. So they don't end up really representing, they don't campaign in their home districts. They all campaign in Kahului and South Kihei because those are the population centers. That's where the votes are. And so they pander to that community. They don't really represent, and they're not really answerable to the individuals of the district they're supposed to be representing. And that's something that, for instance, a charter amendment here in Maui County could possibly change. That, you know, would bring the vote back to the people where they feel that their vote is making a difference. Those are the kind of changes, and I applaud, you know, what you've done, because it will bring this entire political process to the general discussion. It will, you know, give people an opportunity to get invested in the political process and take it back. And that's what has to happen. People need to get lit up. People need to be motivated. They need to understand that this affects everything about the political process and their nation. And we can only hope that people will respond and it'll make a difference.
What is going on the website, on the clerk of House, the website they put up, they're putting up those applications. Like I said, there was 10 applications from 10 different states that are up there. They've also put up a rescission of all previous applications by South Carolina, so they're putting both up there. It's called House Documents, Selected Memorials. It basically says the chair of the committee and the Judiciary Committee has designed for public availability the following memorials presented under Clause 3 of Rule 12. Each memorial purports to be an application of the legislature of the state calling for a convention for proposing amendments, in the plural, to the Constitution of the United States pursuant to Article 5 of the Constitution, or a rescission of prior application. And if you go there, you can sort these by year, or there's another column to sort by state. And that's it. I called up the Legislative Resource Center at the clerk's office, who they're actually doing the website. I wanted to get confirmation from them that, are you folks planning to add another column that would allow us to sort these applications by subject matter, since there's a number of people out there that believe they have to be identical applications applying for the same subject. Are you folks planning to be able to make it sortable by the subject matter? I got a call back. No, they're not. They have no intention of making it sortable by subject matter. And the committee really hasn't decided how they're going to count these things yet. But it's pretty clear to me that if they had thought that it was going to be a consideration, they would have put something in the rule to that effect. They haven't done that. It looks like it's going to be a simple numeric count of states. I know Americans were glued to the TV watching that 2000 recount. This is actually a bigger deal, and nobody seems to know what's going on. I would think that people would really want to take a look at this thing, because it really only takes 34 states, and then we're going to have a constitutional convention. The only limit to that is you can't infringe upon the equal suffrage of the Senate, of the states in the Senate, without their consent. So you can't get rid of the Senate, basically. But everything else is on the table. We have a lot to talk about, and it's unfolding right now, and mainstream media isn't even telling us it's going on. So take a look at that website and kind of watch it happen. Be a part of it. It's history unfolding quite literally.
And you have a website as well?
Yes, articlev.org. We think it's even if we get common people, the most normal, everyday people possible in this assembly, I still say let's decentralize the power of those delegates. We have to assemble ourselves as constituents of America, and assemble in a virtual assembly. We set up the website articlev.org as a tool to facilitate a virtual assembly rather than to promote the Article 5 convention. We figured that it was inevitable. So we were trying to plan ahead for the next step. And we would encourage everybody to check in. You know, if you have an amendment for GMO labeling, create a group in that assembly. Promote it. You can put up video, documents, all kinds of stuff. Abuse it, use it, promote your agenda, and try to win people over to your side. We're trying to build consensus, and the best ideas will win. These will guide and provide feedback for the delegates who are going to have an incredible amount of pressure on them. We need to have this kind of companion thing out there, and in the internet age, there's no reason we can't articulate our desires in a very deliberate and organized fashion.
Now, there's no chance that the United States Constitutional Convention could get crowdsourced.
It is. It can. There's no reason it can't. It doesn't. There's no. It doesn't say that. And again, what happened in Iceland, it was crowdsourced, but the ultimate decision power is with the delegates. But what the delegates did was they listened very well to what the people were doing, and they actually they didn't have the expertise on certain issues, and they basically delegated this kind of thing to a group of experts who would hash out these problems. And they said that one of the delegates had actually said that you would think that the more people you add to the discussion, the more confusing it would get. And she said it was just the opposite. The more people they added to this discussion, the easier it got for the delegates to do it, because they had this group of experts that would talk about this thing, and then they would arrive at consensus, and they would say, you know, we've talked about this, and we think this is the best way to do it. And they would explain it to the delegate, and the delegates would agree. And what ended up happening in the end is they put the entire Constitution up for a vote in Iceland. It passed with over 80% support among their countrymen. The Parliament took a look at this Constitution and rejected it. And you said before that it would be a short-term convention. This is exactly one of those reasons you would want to have a longer-term convention, because they limited their convention to 3 months and gave the product of the convention to the Parliament. If they had retained that convention, if they stayed assembled, as Parliament rejected that Constitution, they take it and push it right back to them and say, no, this one. You know, they don't accept no for an answer.
Right.
The mistake was that they disassembled. We need to we have a need to assemble and deal with this thing. The question then is, do we want to give up what we've created? I mean, if we can organically create something that will articulate the legitimate consensus of our people on a local, state, or national level, why would we ever give that up?
Right.
We're talking about direct democracy, whether it's codified or not. That does, if we can articulate that thing on a steady basis, we really do have a chance at something even greater than a convention. We're talking about a new standard of democracy in the world that we haven't been the modern standard of democracy for 200 years. Everybody else has kind of passed us up. Now it's time for us to kind of regain that position in the world, and just how far can we take it? How much representation, how much democracy can we put into the system? And it'll be a challenge, but if we're competing against the United Kingdom, who also wants to have the most democratic constitution in the world when they're done, we're going to be able to cheat off their paper, and we're going to see what they're doing, what looks really good, what doesn't. And so hopefully we do end up with something that's better than what they have. But, a little friendly competition in that regard is probably not a bad thing.
And especially an interesting choice to be competing against. And
right.
So your website, thearticle5.org, is potentially a conduit for that kind of crowdsourcing where people can put their information up and comments can be made and refinements can be made, and eventually that material offered up to the to the delegates as suggestions.
Yes. We knew that if we're going to open up Pandora's box, we better be ready for it. We better know how to deal with it. And we have opened up Pandora's box. Well, you can hear the hinges creaking. And we do want to be ready for this. And the best way to figure out how to deal with it best is to look at what other countries have done and what has succeeded. And but the reality is that there has never been any convention in any state. There's been over 200 state conventions in our history, but there's never been any convention in any other nation in history either that has been a runaway convention. People talk about it running away, but there has never been anything like that. When we talk about these things historically, it has always been a very human experience where people try their best to solve the problems that of the day. Really, they don't solve future problems. They try to solve what is pressing at that time. And at this time, we have a lot of things, but things like Citizens United, GMOs, voting rights, environmental policies. I mean, we've got a number of things that are really urgent problems that we need to address.
Revolving doors between corporations and government. That lobbyists. There's so many issues that are fundamentally broken in our system. A great opportunity to fix some of these things and once again empower the people to be in the political process. That's great. Dan, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for doing what you've done. A simple step, yet how meaningful it is. And how much can we make of this opportunity to create real change in our nation?
I appreciate that, and I would just encourage everybody to take advantage of the opportunities we're creating. We're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for everybody, and hopefully we make the world the way we want it, finally.
Great opportunity.
Aloha. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dan. Aloha. Everybody, thank you for watching today. Go to mauicauses.org and take a look at what we're doing there. We're a media group that creates media for not-for-profits and other progressive and environmental initiatives that need support. And we need your support, so go ahead and take a look and hit that donate button. Much appreciated. I'm Sam Small. Have a wonderful day. Aloha.